last night, the World Baseball Classic and Cuba came to Miami, and what I wanted to talk to you about, because there seems to be a real cultural disconnect here. Keith Olbermann, between tweets about Putin being a war criminal and Trump getting arrested, is coming out against the WBC, saying that some of these players and these teams are going to have to be insured and aren't going to be able to get insurance because Altuve is out for 8 to 10 weeks, getting injured in an exhibition. Edwin Diaz is out for the season, getting injured.
Yep.
He was saying that these are just exhibitions, but there's a real cultural disconnect here because the players, 6 Dominican players, were asked, what do you like better, World Baseball Classic? What's more important to you, or the World Series? 5 said the World Baseball Classic. These are major leaguers.
Yep.
And 1 said they're the same. Nobody said the World Series.
Interesting.
Randy Arozarena is playing for Mexico. He's not Mexican. He's Cuban. He said his catch in the Mexico game against Puerto Rico felt better and was bigger than the home runs he hit in the World Series. So there's a clear cultural disconnect between how some people care about this and how the Latin players playing for their country and patriotism feel about it. But yesterday, the Cuban team comes to Miami. And speaking of this cultural disconnect, Major League Baseball seems to be surprised and angry about something that I simply don't understand how you can be surprised about unless you're totally culturally disconnected. They were surprised by the amount of protesting last night that the Cuban baseball team was playing. And in Miami, anytime a Cuban artist of any kind, a singer, a theater person, performs, there are 200 protesters remembering a never forget time for our old people in our life who suffered the effects of communism more than us, more than most of Miami does now. You got a dying breed of Cuban who fights communism and knows that that baseball team is a political propaganda tool for the government. And so when it plays in Miami, and it'll never play in Miami again because of what happened last night, because there were people running on the field, there were protests outside the field. Livan Hernandez refused while throwing out the first pitch to shake the hand of the Cuban manager. A Cuban reliever in the bullpen is getting pelted with whatever it is that he was getting pelted with verbally, and he decided to throw a baseball. Did you see the video to this, Chris Cody? Where was the video of this? Like, how hard did he throw a baseball at a heckler?
It seemed like full force. It was like definitely a video from a phone. It wasn't on the broadcast, but it was just, I didn't see the sound, but it was just somebody yelling and pointing down at the pitcher, and he just looked like he got fed up with it and just chucked the ball hard at him. Like a crow hop, like full force. I don't think he hit him, but it's just I'm confused. I mean, I'm definitely a little ignorant with this stuff. Why are we taking this out on the players? I mean, this is such a difficult spot for them to be in.
This is something that's always at the core of this, because you don't want to be mad at the players. They're representing baseball, their government. They're representing their own form of patriotism and can't speak freely about it for fear of risk of their families being punished when the baseball player has a better life than most in Cuba. And it still isn't such a great life, but they come in here and they get totally beat up. I'm more interested in the fact that Major League Baseball is angry about what happened yesterday, as if they haven't had a baseball team in this town forever. Like, it's like they do not understand what is happening in this market in any way whatsoever. And it's a strange disconnect that they would be surprised in any way. Like, you have to be paying no attention and you have your hand on the pulse of nothing going on here if you're surprised that a few hundred people would protest this.
Especially when Rob Manfred told us he has a house in Palm Beach.
That's about as close to this as it gets. Yes, that's about as close as it gets to this.
I think they were somewhat aware of the possibility of this because they started Cuba, not in the United States. There were 3 regions that they started this tournament in, and they had him in Japan, as geographically far away from here as possible. And I imagine they were just sort of hoping, well, let's hope that Cuba doesn't advance, because then we know that they're heading to Miami. And I don't know how much they want to disconnect from Miami, because Miami has turned this thing into one of the most fun events to watch. And like, maybe there's a chance that it would be like this in other cities. But if you're hearing a bunch of people going, oh, the WBC, what does it even mean? If you played it in other baseball cities, they might not be as into it. But when you're creating an international competition that taps into patriotism, that's never going to be a purely clean experience.
But you can have it be rabid without being this political. It wasn't this political anywhere else. It's this team in this market. Cuba playing anywhere else in the United States doesn't cause this, because this is the only market where you will find this kind of indignant sort of fighting for the beliefs of our grandparents.
There's kind of ignorance, too, when it comes to the fact of, like, Cuba playing in other places. It's like, oh, we don't really know anything about Cuba. It's just kind of far over there, and, like, people over there deal with it. And, like, I don't really know anything. I know some stuff that happened in the 60s, but that doesn't mean anything to me today. Like, this here is a powder keg. There's people that have come from Cuba generationally, from my grandparents to my parents to people that are still coming over now. And it's like, people have different connection points with Cuba.
Stugotz, when baseball comes to town and gets with its passion a rabid patriotism, but also politics, do you realize how uncomfortable that makes anybody in management, anybody in charge, to have, they want the commerce of the rabid enthusiasm without the reminders, oh, hey, that's an awful communist regime that oppresses and hurt and caused great pain to our grandparents and parents.
And they can't get one without the other, it seems like.
Not with Cuba,
Right.
you can't. Not Cuba and Miami.
But their idea is to turn this into the Baseball World Cup. And it's working because, as you said, there are players in the Dominican team that feel as if this is a really important competition. So they want this to be the Baseball World Cup. As you start expanding, you're only increasing the likelihood that countries with political problems show up at your door. As a matter of fact, Venezuela was in this tournament, and they were playing games in Miami, and there's some issues there. There's a huge Venezuelan community here. They have huge political problems in that country, but it didn't quite boil over because there isn't the same fervor. There isn't, I guess, the same kind of infrastructure that there is for Cuban politics in Miami. But it is inevitable. I mean, we saw it with the most recent World Cup. Qatar was hosting the thing, and then they played in it. That was a huge political issue. Saudi Arabia was in that tournament. That was a political issue. Russia was thrown out of the tournament in the qualifying stage. That was a huge issue. And FIFA has kind of proven incompetent at being able to handle those things over and over and over again. So if you're tapping into international stuff, you don't just get the, we're going to sell a bunch of Dominican Republic hats and people are going to be wearing them around Miami all the time. You also have to take this other stuff too. And it's complex and it's hard. And like you said, it's kind of impossible to believe that they couldn't have seen some of this coming with fielding a Cuban team in this tournament.